Alright, in this video we're going to create enemy movements, so we're going to have multiple different types. So let me press play. As you can see here, we have a slime that moves left and right on the screen and he bounces between 2 points. We have this bat which follows me, so if I move away the bat will keep coming after me. So wherever I go the bat's going to just constantly follow, unless I get out of a certain range. So when I'm far enough away the bat will stop following, and if I get close enough he'll start following me again. Meanwhile, the other bat on the screen is randomly flying at any point. So he has a random spawn point that will spawn him. So let's look at the game view. So this one's following me, but this one starts and flies off the screen, and then he'll start and randomly appear somewhere else. So a little bit higher in this case, but it could be anywhere between the screen height view. So he's up a little higher this time. So he'll disappear, as you can see here, off the screen and reappear somewhere else. So it looks like I have a constant flying enemy. You could use this for, like, say, spikes falling down. Once they fall down, they'll disappear and start up here again. And you can have it used for other things like flying across the screen to hit you. So different types of motions. And the slime down here, the bats have no collision on them, so they'll just keep flying at me, but won't actually bump me. They'll be using triggers rather than rigid bodies, whereas the slime will push me and I can push it back. So we have some collision against each other. So you can use either option, whether you want them to be have no collision or have collision. So that's what this video is going to cover, on how to make these different enemy movements. So let's get started. Let me jump out of this one and pull up the other one. Alright, so in the last video we left off with, we had the character jumping. So we built the level, our basic level. We have the character who can move left and right. We have the ability to jump, and we can jump over to different platforms. And we have him ducking and crouching when he lands, and when he falls off, he hits the fall state, rather than continually walking in the air as he's walking off the edge. So that's where we left off with last time. So let's go pull in some enemy sprites now. So I'm going to pull up my sprite folder, and I have a couple of different types of enemies. I have a bat flying and a bat flying too, so 2 different types of bats. I'll kind of differentiate using those types. And then I have a slime. So I'm going to take all 3 of these at once. And if you wanted to, you don't have to use sprite sheets where they have all the sprites in one row. You could take multiple individual images. That would work also when you bring them into your sprite folder. So I'm going to take all of these and bring them into the sprites. And so now they should be in here. So I have bat flying 2, and the slime hopping. So if they were individual images, when I expand this out, I wouldn't have just one. I'd have like a whole stream of these different images. Actually, I'd have a whole bunch of slime hopping 1, slime hopping 2, and each one of these would have a sprite attached to it. So it makes it a little more cleaner if you just have a big sprite sheet, because it has one name tag rather than 10 different slime hoppings, each having one of these in here. But you can do either option. Alright, so let's adjust this and cut these out. So we're going to go over to single mode, and I'm going to change this to multiple because I have multiple sprites. And then I'm going to go over to sprite editor, and I'm going to slice and figure out what size these are at. Let's try 64. Nope, I must have made this at 128. 128 by 128. Slice again. And yep, you can see that they all slice out nice and centered, so I must have drawn it at that rate. I'm going to press actually before I press apply, you can zoom in and see if they have some clarity on them. It looks like it's pretty clear. If not, it might just be a matter of changing your size here. The size is 1792, but a maximum 2048. So if you're max at 2048, you might need to increase your max size. So it looks like it's fine. So I'm going to press apply, and that'll slice out all of these images. So I'll close this out, and I'm going to change compress to true color so it gives it a better quality, and press apply again. So now if I pull this out, I should have all these unique images. And let's do that to the bats real quick. So I'm going to click the bat, single to multiple, sprite editor, and slice. Let's try 128. Nope, must be a lot smaller. 32 by 32. Yep, that's where that was made at. So we'll apply that and close it. And let's grab, I'll change again, compress to true color to give better quality image. And then I didn't press apply yet, so it's asking me to apply. Alright, so bat flying 2. Again, last one, change that to multiple. I'll change that to true color, apply that, and then go to the sprite editor and slice at 32. Okay, this must have been a 64 sprite. Slice, and it slices in half. Alright, perfect. Press apply and close that. So now we have all of our sprites sliced out and ready for use. Alright, so in order to create a sprite, or in order to create the enemy, we could do a couple different options. I'm going to jump over to the hierarchy tab right here and go to create, and I can either go for 2D object and drop a sprite in here, or I could just drag the image into the screen as well. So either option should work, but I'll do this way for now. So I'll click sprite, and we don't see anything here in the game mode, so let's click over to the scene mode, and in scene mode we can see we have a sprite. But the sprite is invisible, there is no image, because the sprite renderer has none for the image. So I'm going to click this little bullseye, and we have the option to pick a sprite. I'm going to start with the slime hopping frame 0. So double click that, and this is now like my placeholder image, I guess you could say, and so he's going to be sitting here. Also of note, he's going to be, actually it looks like he's in front of the grass. Sometimes you might need to change your layer order so he sits in front of the grass, or behind the grass, depending how that is. Alright, so let's put the slime down here. And so now we have a slime in our scene. If I press play, nothing's going to happen because he has no code attached to him yet. Let's put some animation on him also, because he's at the moment just going to be a still frame image. So let's go over to animation and make sure we're clicked on the slime object. So I want to rename this so I know that this is a slime. And so it renames it in the folder or the file now. So this is my slime sprite. So let's go back to the animation tab. And again, if your animation tab is in here, just go up to window and animator and animation. These are the two that I'm using right now. Alright, so the animation tab, again, while selected on this sprite, otherwise it won't give you the option to, actually I guess it could, but you need to attach the animation to the slime rather than create an animation not assigned to anything. So, create clip, and I'm going to put this in the animations folder to keep things organized, and I'm going to call this slime hopping. Alright, save that. So now we have, by creating this, the slime right here automatically gets an animator attached to him with the slime as the animation. Alright, so let's add the frames in there. So slime hopping, I'll grab frame 0 to frame 13 and hold shift to click the last one, and it grabs all of them. Then drag these in here and they'll all pop in right here. I'm going to change my sample from 60 to 30 because I'm using 30 frames per second. That's what I drew it at, so I want to leave it at that. And if I were to press play, you could see, actually, wrong play button. That plays the game. But either way, you can still see the slime is hopping. So let's unpause that. If I press this play button, it'll play the slime hopping. Alright, so let's unpause that. Alright, so we have the slime hopping. His animation's good now. Let's close out this. And alright, before we start coding, we should do one more thing. What's going to happen is that when we start coding the slime, he's going to start moving and eventually just fall off and just keep falling off. What we're going to do with this concept is we're going to have him bounce between 2 points. So we're going to put an invisible marker right here and right here, and so he's going to bounce between 2 set points. This way he looks like he's staying on the ledge. Otherwise, if we don't have that, he'll just keep going one direction non-stop until he basically falls off the edge of the world. So in order to do that, let's go and create I guess an empty. So we'll take this empty, which has basically nothing on it, and we'll add a component. This will be a physics 2D component, and we'll make a box collider. You could use, I guess, other colliders, but I'm going to use the box. And then when the box collider is added on here, I can expand this out, and then go edit collider, and it doesn't have to be too big. It just needs to be basically a wall. And that's probably fine enough. So I'll cancel out of the edit. There we go. And then move this. Actually, I probably should have centered that a little better. So let's put this up here, pull this up here. So it kind of centers on the origin a little better. There we go. Alright, so this will be my box. So he'll hit here and reverse. This could be a lot smaller if you wanted it to. It's not really a problem. As long as any part of his collision hits this. Alright, so we have this, and I'm going to call this my reverse collision. Alright, and I also want to put a tag on this so the character can recognize what this is. So instead of being untagged, if I click this, I don't want to use any of the existing tags, so they're not quite, I want to have my own tag that specifically denotes what it is. So I'm going to add a tag, and I'm going to click the plus button since I already have a ground tag. So now I'm going to make a new tag. So this tag is going to be called reverse. Simple enough, it kind of makes sense, but you can call it whatever you want. Alright, so I've created a reverse tag, so if I go back to the slime, I can now use the tag I created called reverse. If I click on that, I have reverse, and if I ever want to modify tags, I can click add tag. Let's say I want to make this capital because the other ones were capital, but it doesn't matter. So now it's updated there. Alright, so I've created a reverse tag, and actually no, I've stuck that on the slime himself. The slime doesn't have a tag, untag. We'll get to tagging him later. The reverse collision is the one that needs the tag. So we'll add, reverse collision, add the reverse. Alright, so the reverse collision object has reverse tag on it, and I want to put one on the other side as well. So I'm going to press Control D to duplicate, and then I can slide this over here and maybe move it down some. Alright, so I have another reverse collision. I'll kind of keep these organized. So I have 1 and 2, and Control D is basically up here where it says duplicate Control D. Alright, so I have reverse collision 1 and 2. Also of note, I want to make sure this is a trigger, so I'm going to take the collision and make it a trigger. And this one needs to be trigger also. So while I'm at it, I might as well just take this and drop it from the hierarchy into the project tab. And by doing so, it creates a prefab and turns it blue. So I can probably delete this one and bring it out of there back to here. So every time I make a change to this one, it affects all of them. So since they're both blue, any change that occurs to this will occur to the other one. If you wanted different shapes and sizes, you might want to make separate ones, but in this case, since I'm using the same shape and size, I'll leave it as is. So that's up to you how you want to work that. Alright, so now that we have invisible barriers that only apply to, or we will code it to only apply to the slime, and because there is a trigger, if there isn't a trigger, let's say we go back to this one and there is no trigger, and we were to press play. When the character walks over here, the slime doesn't have any collision on him yet, and you see the character is hitting an invisible box. So it's collision, but it's reacting to the character, and we don't want the character bumping into this invisible box. So by turning it to is trigger, now the character doesn't collide with it anymore. It doesn't affect the character, so he'll go right through it. Alright, and let's add collision to the slime now so we can bump into him. Alright, let's recheck the trigger on that. We'll click on this, and let's add component. We'll go with physics 2D. I'll do a circle collider because that looks like it should pretty much match the shape of the slime. And the circle collider, and if it's minimized, you're not going to see it, but if you expand it out, you'll see your collider. And I could click the edit button, or I could type in manual numbers. I'll scale this a lot smaller. Let's try 0.3. And it looks like he's on the ground plane, so that should about work, I guess. And he doesn't need to be a trigger. If you wanted him to not have collision, you would use his trigger, and the character could walk through him, and it would still cause him damage, but you two wouldn't collide. As seen from when I first started and showed what the level looked like, he had the option to push the slime and jump on the slime and move him, and that's because he is not a trigger. He's a rigid body object. He has collision. Alright, so now that we have all this set up, the slime has the ability to bounce between 2 points. And so now we just have to code them to move left and right. So let's add component. And we're probably going to need, we'll go Playmaker FSM. So now we have the Playmaker component on here. I'm going to name this to movement. So I know that this is the slime's movement, and it says it right here and right there. So I know it's his movement because we're going to do other things like collide with the player and cause damage and health and all that. So this is the movement FSM. Alright, so the first FSM, the first state for this one, we're going to call slime movement. And the slime movement, we're going to have a transition state. So we're going to go to events, add a transition, and this one's going to be called reverse direction. Alright, so now that I've made a reverse direction transition, I can right click on the state, add transition, and click on reverse direction. So now I have a reverse direction added to my state. So now let's make use of this. So I'm going to go to the action browser, which is right here, and I'm going to pull up move towards and drag that in there. And so what move towards will do is it'll move towards a specific point. You can have the game object, which is the slime, because use owner. A target object, you could have it move towards a certain person. You can pick a character, you could pick an object, and he'll move towards the object in the game. I'm not going to have him move towards an object. We're going to do that in the next example where the bat follows the character. Right now I'm just going to say move towards a specific point. So target position 0, 0, 0, and that's what's corresponding to here. So if I were to move this, or not necessarily, oops. There we go. If I were to change this number, it should correspond to that. So if I change the X position to something a lot lower, it should pull this box around. Let's change that back to 0. And then the ignore vertical option. This way he's not going at an angle. It shouldn't matter if he has gravity pulling him down. So let's put the ignore vertical on him just so he stays in a horizontal line. He doesn't try and move up and down. Alright, so we have ignore vertical on there. And when doing the target position, let's zoom out. Assuming this is the start of your level and you're starting at 0, 0, then you'd be perfectly fine leaving at 0, 0. So he'll try and move to this direction. When he gets to this point, he'll stop. If your level's a bit longer, you could take the X position and slide it way out here into the negatives, in which case you'll always try to go here, which is out of your level bounds, which is what you want to keep them in a set position. And that should work, unless you have you could set 2 specific points. You could say, if he reaches this point, then flip him. But yeah, then if he falls, he won't ever be able to leave that position. So this way he can still jump to other platforms if we have other collision boxes around. Alright, so I'm going to put this back to 0, but again you can change this number to wherever you want to move them in different positions. 0 should be fine for what I'm doing right here to keep on this platform. Alright, and finished event, it shouldn't really apply because he'll never actually reach this event because we're going to have a collision box in the way. But you could put something there if he actually did collide with that point. You could have it like reverse direction or something, which we're going to do next. So I'm going to actually use the invisible box. So if I go to trigger 2D event, we're going to say on trigger enter, and collide tag we've already named. So we're going to click these 2 bars to pull up our tags. When the object collides with a reverse tag, so these 2 objects we named, they're invisible. They have reverse tags on them. When the slime hits the reverse tag, send event to reverse direction. So again, you could put the reverse direction here when he reaches this specific point, or you can use the blocks. In this way, if I put a slime anywhere with 2 different blocks, it'll always bounce between 2 blocks rather than always looking at 2 different points. And you'd have to make every different slime have every different point. And it's just a little easier if you have boxes. Alright, so let's make a new state now. Add state. What happens when he goes from reverse direction to this state? I'm going to call this state reverse direction. And I'm going to make another finished event. So I could go finish, or I can just call it reverse direction again, so I can reuse the same name and send it back to here. So he'll reverse direction, and when he hits the next point, he'll go back to here in a loop. So on this state, action browser, actually is going to be the exact same thing. So I could just delete this and save myself the time. So delete state, copy, and paste states, and I don't want to replace the original, so it just makes a copy. So I could call slime movement 2, and we're going to say reverse direction, but whatever you want to call it. So this one goes to here, this one goes to here, and pretty much the only difference is now once he's reversed, I need to pick a target position. So I'm going to set X at like 1,000. So 1,000 is way out here. He's going to try and go super, super far. But you can set it to whatever number you want. 1,000 might be overkill, considering that each of these blocks is like a unit. So either way, you can set the number to wherever you want. And again, ignore vertical, so he just stays on horizontal plane. And he doesn't need to follow an object. And I'm not going to worry about if he reaches that far, because he's going to be hitting a collision box before that happens. So again, he hits the enter, or he enters the collision, reverse tag, reverses direction, and he'll keep bouncing back and forth. So if we were to press play now, he's going to jump right to that position. So we got to add one more thing. We need to go add component, physics 2D, rigid body, and by adding this on here, we can press play, and now he suddenly has gravity, and he falls. So we've got the gravity on there. Let's jump back to here. So, okay, so there's one more option we got to check. The max speed right here, he's jumping way too fast at 10, so he's automatically bypassing the collision. So we need to set this to a unit of 1. So he has a max speed of 1 and a bit slower. And the same thing over here, so he has a max speed that's slower. And if I press play now, he'll start moving that direction, but he's also rolling, so we want to fix the rolling aspect. So click fixed angle so he doesn't roll anymore. And he needs to be a trigger. No trigger. Okay, there we go. So now he'll, without the rolling option on here, he'll bounce between 2 points. So as soon as his collision tag hits a collision tag over here, he'll bounce back and forth. And so if I were to walk my character over there now, see the character will be able to add collision to him because of the rigid body and push back and forth. And the character won't have any collision with the invisible box, but the slime will, because the slime is coded to have a tag for that, and the character doesn't have a tag that applies to that. And if I click the slime again, if I didn't have a rigid body on there, then he wouldn't have the gravity. So if I were to remove this component, you can see that he's just going to keep pushing forward. So we need that rigid body on there to keep him from doing that. So if I press play, because I had made any changes in the play mode, it won't save. Whatever you change in play mode doesn't keep updated. Alright, so we have the slime motion coded in there, so he'll bounce between 2 points. Alright, so the next step is to create a motion for, let's say, a bat. So we'll take our bat, okay, let's take the bat flying for this one, and instead of, let's take bat flying 0. So instead of creating an empty sprite like you did last time, I'll just drag the sprite itself in here. I'll put them up there, I guess. So now I've added just the one sprite in here. Alright, so now that I have the sprite in here, we need to go and add, let's see, add collision again. So add component, physics 2D, and circle collider, and then change the circle size, something smaller, something about like right there, I guess. Maybe change the X offset over a little, and maybe the Y up a little. So that centers a little better on the bat. Alright, so there's his collision. Next up, let's go add component, and we'll add Playmaker, so start coding him. If we added the rigid body, he'll fall straight down because of gravity, so I don't want gravity on him, I'm not going to add the rigid body on him. But he still has collision, so he should still interact with other collidable objects and hit it and kind of fly around it because he has collision in his path. Alright, so now that we have Playmaker up, let's call this one following. So this is the code for him following me. So on state 1, I'll call state 1 distance. So in order to make him have a set distance, so as soon as the game starts, if he's at the end of the level, he won't automatically start trying to find me. He'll only find me if I'm within like the screen view per se. So if I'm a close enough radius, then he'll come after me. Alright, so we're going to check his distance first in order to get that to happen. So I'm going to get distance, drag this in here, and we're going to check the game object. In this case, we're going to use the owner. So we're going to be able to figure out what the owner's distance to the target distance, and this will be, we'll go to the scene mode and grab the character. So we're going to check the owner, which is the bat, compared to the character, which is right here. And we're going to store this result as a variable. We don't have one yet. Variable, I'll call it distance, so we know what the distance is. And we'll put distance in there. We'll do this every frame as well, because we want to check every frame that the game is playing is character within distance. So now that we've defined this number that's going to constantly keep changing as distance, now we need to compare. So we're going to take this float compare, drop this in here, and the float we're going to check is distance compared to, and this is depending on your screen size. I'm going to do 6. If you count 6 units, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if I get one more unit closer, he's going to start seeing me. So again, the numbers you have on your grid is kind of corresponding to what you're seeing here. So we're going to compare the distance he is to the number that I think is close enough to him. We'll say 6. And we're going to say if it's greater than 6, so we're going to need some transitions before we can do this. And we want to do this every frame as well. So I'm going to go add event. We need a couple transitions. Let's call this transition following, I guess. Or we can just call it follows. Oops, follows. Alright, so we'll go to add transition follows. So we have a follows on here. And scroll down. So if it's greater than, nothing's going to happen. He's just going to stay where he is. But if it's less than, he'll go to the follow state. And if it's equal to, we're not going to worry about that. Basically, if he's less than 6 units, he'll go start following. As soon as he becomes greater than 6 units, he'll stop following because he's no longer in range. Alright, so let's make the next state, add state, and we'll connect this one to here. So if follows becomes active because he's close enough, let's call this one following. So he checked distance and now he's following. So we're going to use the same thing as last time. Get distance, and on this one we're going to check again the same thing. Is he still within range? If he's not, then stop following him, because this one, once the code has said he is close enough, it'll go to this state and it won't go back to the previous state to know to stop. So we could just basically copy this again. So get state, scene, character, store result as distance every frame, and I can just also take the float compare, Control C to copy it, Control V to paste it, and say if it's less than, if it's greater than, actually, add transition. I could use finished again, or I can make a new one. I'll make a new one. We'll call it stays, so he stays in place. Not necessarily stays, but he could stay. So we'll go, if he's greater than, then go back to stay, add transition, he'll stay. And if he's less than, then he's going to keep following. Alright. Should be, I think, all we need for this. Actually, we don't have follows even used, so I could probably just turn that off. So it doesn't matter if he's less than or not, he's just going to always follow him. And so it'll repeat in this looping pattern. And actually, we need one more thing. So action browser. Move towards, add one more in here, so we're comparing it, and then we're going to move towards again. So once he reaches this state, so he was reaching the state, but he jumps to here and he doesn't keep moving towards it, so we need to keep moving him towards this character. Alright, so keep moving towards the character. So we have get distance, compare the distance, and we're going to keep following also. So he's going to keep following the character. Move speed of 1. We should probably check this one as well. That doesn't have a move speed anyways. He stopped. Alright, so now he'll move. And if he collides with the character, then we're going to go to stay, and stay will restart the pattern. Alright, so now he's in range, and he's going to follow me wherever I go. And if he collides with me, he's going to keep pushing me around, and that's because he has collision on him. So I want to make sure I don't have this option. So if I click is trigger, he'll no longer push me, because the collision has now been turned into a trigger and not a pushing or collidable event. So he's going to keep following me wherever I go. And he'll never stop. He's always going to be right on me, unless I get far enough away. So if I move as far as I possibly can, and then run really quick, if I get far enough away, he'll stop moving. Alright, so again, quick review, get distance, and float compare the distances, and then we'll check again, determine if he should stop following, and then he needs to move towards to get the character to follow me. Alright, and you can modify this one more option. If you wanted the bat to pause as soon as he hits me, like to wait a second or something, you could say move towards when he actually hits me, go to another event, and then have a wait time there for like a second, and then continue back to restart the loop rather than jump right back here. Because this way he's unending, he's going to always follow me. But this way, if you go from finish event, create a new state, wait, back to here, you'd have a pause between him coming after you. Alright, so now we have him following, but he doesn't flip around left and right. So we're going to make a new FSM. So change following, add a state there. I'm going to put this under, I guess flip direction, or just direction is fine. Alright, so we'll do direction, we're going to do action browser, and this is pretty much just going to be like the, or very similar to the slime where it flips left and right. So under flip direction, I'm going to change this, the direction state. Actually, let's make some events first. So I'm going to make an event called flip left, and then flip right. I'm going to add these transitions on here, flip left, flip right, and then add a state, and this will be the flip state. So I'm going to call this, not flip state, flip left, and make a new state, call this flip right. Alright, so flip left, flip left, flip right, we've got these set, and then I'm going to call these finished, I guess. So as soon as it flips, it goes back to finished. Alright, so all these are now set up. The last thing is to drop the code on here. So we're going to say we need to compare some distances first. So I'm going to get some positions. So get position. And I'm going to get the position of, let's say, the owner. And I'm going to store the owner's X position. And I need to make a variable in order to store it. So I'm going to call this bat position. So I know what the bat's position is. And I'm also going to need a character position. So I'm going to make a new one called player position. Alright, so I have the two positions set or created for variables. So back to the states. So I'm going to get the position of the bat, his X position, and save it as the bat's position. So it's going to check his distance across. And then I'm also going to check this every frame. So he's constantly checking where he is. And we're going to check also the character's position. So do this again, get position. Characters, X will be user owner specify game object. And we're going to say the character. So the character's X position. So we have the bat's X and the character's X. Both do this every frame. And then we're going to action browser, one last thing. We're going to float compare and drop this in here. And we don't need to worry about the y and the z, because all we're doing is saying his x, because if he's on the left side, he's going to face the left, and if he's on the right side, he's going to face the right. So we just have to compare the x's. We don't need to worry about comparing the y and the z's. So if that makes sense. So compare the bat's x to the player's x. We'll add these in here. So the bat's position compared to the player's position, both x's, and say if the bat's position is greater than the player's position, so his x's, if the bat's x is bigger, then the bat is on the right side, so we're going to flip left. And again, likewise, if the bat's position is less than the player's x, so the bat must be on the left side. If his x is less than the character's x, then we need to flip the bat to the right. And so that's how we do the flip part. And again, we'll do that every frame, so the bat is constantly flipping back and forth. I'll expand these back out. So bat position is stored as x. Player's position, which is a character object, stored as x. Compare the two x's, flip left and right. And what happens when it jumps these states, we need to set scale. All right. And we're going to say for the flip left direction, if he's flipping left, since he's already facing this direction, he's going to need a -1. So click this, put a -1, and I don't need to do it every frame, just do it once and then jump back. So we'll copy this one, Control C, paste it. Okay, I didn't copy. Control C, Control V, and this should be a +1. And we don't need to do it every frame. So if I press play now, he's going to calculate that the player has a less x than he does, so he flips the correct direction. And if the player then starts moving towards the bat will start following. And as soon as the player is on the other side, as soon as the player is on the other side, he should flip to the other direction, which looks like he's not flipping just yet. So let's check what went wrong there. I guess one more thing, let's change the trigger so he is a trigger so we can go through the character. And there's one more thing we got to adjust. In order for the bat to actually, the finished state to occur, we need something to tell it to go to the finished state. So we need to add one more thing, something that will tell it to use to finish so it goes back. So I'm going to do a wait, drop a wait on here. And I can say 1 second before he flips, probably more like 0.5 or something, or I could do 0.1, and then finished event goes to finish. So now we have something telling it to go back to finished. So I'm going to copy this, copy selected action, paste selected action, and now if I press play, now he'll go back to the finished state. So if I take character over here, so he'll flip left and right. It takes a half second before he flips, but you can see here he's flipping left and right. And he has no collision of the character because we have this set to is trigger, but if this were suddenly to be a trigger, he'd start pushing the character just like the slime pushes him. But I'm going to take and set that guy to not a trigger, so the bat just kind of flies after him. Alright, so now we have two enemies coded. We have the slime bouncing between 2 points. We have the bat, which is constantly following the player, but only as far as he's in range. And so one last thing. Alright, so the last thing is to make the bat fly across the screen at random points. So let's go over to our project and grab the second or the first bat. I'm going to take frame 0 and drop this bat somewhere on the screen, and so I'll put him there. And he's already using that sprite. In this case, we want to do Playmaker again. Actually, we do animation, so we want the bat to be flapping. In both cases, I forgot to put the animation on that guy. So I'll take this guy again, go to animation, take both of these 2 frames, drop them in. Actually, we need to make one first. Create a new clip. Under animations, flying. Then I can take both of these, drop them in here, change this to 30 frames per second. That might be a bit quick, but we'll see what happens. I can change it to a smaller number as well. Alright, so Let's play that. Move the scene over here. Actually, pause the animation. Put the animation tab over here, go to scene, press play. We can see the bat's kind of flapping his wings a bit fast, so I'm going to change that to something smaller. I can either grab this keyframe and pull it further out, or I can just change the sample rate. If I press play now, we can see the bat, he flaps his wings a little bit slower, so it's not as fast. Looks like it's glitching a little. Alright, so we have, actually, yeah. Let's put that back on 1 and we'll just change this. This will probably be the easier method. We'll put that to like 4 frames per second to press play. So that works a lot better. It's, yeah, if it's too close to each other, then they're just going to have a longer gap in 1 frame of that. So it's just better this way. Maybe 6 be a little faster. Okay. I'll end recording on that. And let's do the other one. So I'll click on this bat right here. I'll make a new clip, animations. I probably should differentiate the names, so I'll call flying 1. I'll take this bat's animation, drop these into here. Again, set that to say something like 8, and press play, see how he looks. He's probably flying a little too quick. Let's go 6 again. Okay, so that works. Alright, stop recording, put this tab back over here, and then jump back to the scene mode. So now I have both the animations recorded for the characters. So go back to here, and let's add component Playmaker for the coding. On this Playmaker, let's call this one I guess bat flying. That should work. Or just call it movement. Or flying as perk. Alright, so I'll call this flying because we're going to have other collision events for the character, for the bat. So on state number 1, let's call this one movement. And we're going to make a transition. Actually, we got to make the transition first. So this one's going to be called off screen. So when the bat goes off screen because he's gone far enough away, transition off screen. So now we have the state with the off screen set. Let's go to action browser and I'm going to put set velocity 2D. Drag this in here. And again, the physics 2D was a package we added separately from the Playmaker website. It's not part of the original Playmaker. It's an extra add-on we covered in the earlier tutorials. This one needs a rigid body 2D component in order to set the velocity 2D. So I'm going to add the rigid body by clicking that and turns this on. But in order to keep them from colliding with me, I'm going to take and put a collider on here. Physics 2D circle collider, just like I had last time. I changed this one to is trigger, so I no longer have collision with the bat. And then I can change the radius to something like 0.12. Alright, and that should be a little bit smaller to fit his size a little better. Alright, so we have that on there. So we might not even need this anymore. Remove component. Nope, we still do. Alright, so put that back on there. Alright, so we have the bat on here, set velocity 2D. We're going to say X. We're going to put a number in here. I'm going to say his velocity is 2. So he's going to move at a speed of 2. And we're going to get distance. And we're going to get the distance again from the owner to the distance being the character as the target. And we're going to store this. We're going to need a new variable called distance. Alright, so we're going to do this every frame as well. So we're going to find out the space between this bat and the player and store it as distance. And then we're going to compare. This will be a float compare. So and again, the order matters in this case because you're getting a distance, you're saving it, and then you're comparing it. If you can't compare it before you get the distance, you have to put these in a certain sequence. Float number 1, we're going to go with the distance, and we're going to compare that to, let's say, 6. And this will be a matter of how far off the screen he needs to be before he respawns. So again, the higher the number, the longer it's going to take him to respawn. So we'll say 6. Alright, and we'll say that if it's greater than 6, then he's off screen. If he's less than, we don't really care about because he's still on the screen and we're going to use every frame. So distance compared to 6 is greater, he's off screen. So we're going to go make a new state, add state. We're going to draw a line across and call this one random respawn. So in order to make him randomly respawn, we're going to add a couple different codes on here. Let me add a transition called finished and drag this back here. So now it creates this loop. And on this respawn state, let's get position, drag this in here, and I'm going to get the position again of the character. So game object, specify game object, and pick the character. So we need to know where the character is, because if the character is falling off the screen at a super fast rate, the bat won't be able to respawn fast enough, and it's going to create a loop that breaks the code. So we need to find out the X and the Y direction of where the character is moving. Alright, so we're going to create some variables. I'm going to make a new one called player X and a new one called player Y. So we have the player's X and the player's Y. Let's go back to the state. We're going to store the X as player X and the Y as the player's Y. And we're going to, we don't need to do this every frame, just as soon as this occurs that he's off the screen, just do this once. Alright, so the next step, we need to do a random float. And the random float we're going to put on, he has a minimum of, let's say, -2 and a maximum of 2. And so this is corresponding to where the player is, so minimum, the -2 and the maximum 2. So this is your screen height basically. So you might need to change these numbers depending on where this goes. So if I set this like 4, he might appear off the screen too high above me to even notice. So I'm limiting this to 2 boxes. So 1, 2 up, and 1, 2 below me. So it's just enough to keep him on the screen. So that's your random range of heights. If you wanted this to be, I guess, vertical, we would change this to being the Y, but in this case, since it's going horizontal, I'm going to use this as the X. But first I need to compare or add this value. So I'm going to make a new variable called random height. Go back to here, I'm going to store this as the random height. So I've taken the player's X, the player's Y, and made a random number of random height. So let's add another option. And we need to start adding some things. So float add, we're going to take and add the player's Y, and we're going to add this to the random height. So again, as I mentioned earlier, actually we need to do this after the random, so that the random occurs first. So it saves the random. So if you're doing a spike coming from the ceiling, you would want to do a random X of, let's say, -3 to +3, so you have 6 unit range, again, depending on the size of your sprites and the grid size. You take that and you add that to the player's X, which is his horizontal. But I'm taking the player's Y, so it's -2 and +2 as a random height. So if it picks -2, it'll add -2 to the player's Y. So if that makes sense, it'll put it down here. And we don't need to do this every frame because it only has to respawn at once. And then the last thing, we need to add one more float add underneath that one. And we're going to add the player's X. We're going to add that to, actually, we're going to just put a number on here, -4. So it's going to be -4, so if it's only 3 pixels or 3 units he can see on the screen, so a 4th unit would be, say, 1, 2, 3. He can only see this far, so if he appears -4, he'll appear off screen. So we have -4. We again don't need to do that every frame. So the last thing is we've taken the X position minus at 4 because his position could be anywhere. If he's at the end of the level, he could have 1,000 on his X. So we're going to minus 4 off of his 1,000. Otherwise, if we don't have the player's X, it's going to put it at the beginning of minus 4 coordinates. So we're going to add one more thing. Set position. Drop this to the very bottom. And we're going to take the X is the player's X, and the Y is the player's Y. And then once that's done, it should go to the finish state and restart. Alright, so in a quick review, we found out what the player's X and Y is. We're going to take a random number for his value up and down, and we're going to add that random number to the Y, so he randomly appears based on the player's height. If the player is 10 units high in the level, it will randomly appear between 8 and 12. But if the player is minus 100 units, it'll be like minus 98 or minus 102. And then again, the X, we're going to take his X, because wherever he is on the level, and we want to add -4, so it puts it behind him, and then take those numbers, so we just added the -4 to the player X, and hopefully that all makes sense. So if we press play now, oops, that bat shouldn't have the rigid body on him. Remove component. Alright, except this says that it needs it. Alright, so he does need the rigid body because that's his gravity, but the problem is we don't want him falling off the screen. So at this point he doesn't move because he needs the rigid body. So we put the rigid body on him, and then he starts falling off the screen because he has a rigid body, and the rigid body will drop him. So if I set the rigid body to having 0 gravity, so now he'll just float in the air. So he has the rigid body, but he's floating, so he's randomly appearing now. And again, with trigger selected, it won't push the character. But if trigger is turned off, when the character appears here, it'll push the character when he collides with the character. So I don't want that to occur. So I'm going to use, if I don't use is trigger, it's going to hit him. Is trigger, oops. Now it, oops. Let's try it again. It looks like the code got a little messed up. Alright, so now the bat's flying, and wherever I go, he doesn't collide with me. So we have 3 different character movements now, or enemy movements. This enemy's following me. This enemy is respawning. It could be respawn anywhere. So it's at the moment it's respawning over here, where it was over there. But if I go further over here, you'll see it respawns right there. So minus the -4 value right here, depending on wherever the character is. And that about covers how to do enemy movements. We have 3 different types, so you can pick and choose whichever type you would like to use. The next tutorial should be about attacks and how to get the player to attack them.